everyone, and welcome you back to the Soltesz Institute webinar series. Today it is a very interesting topic. We're gonna discuss chargebacks and disputes and the different kind of chargebacks, and basically we are gonna focus on is the reality versus what is the regulation around these chargebacks and disputes. And I have Mark here with me, who is the founder of Disputify, who is going to discuss a lot of real case scenarios and real life examples, and I can't wait to begin. As usual, we always have a couple of questions from the audience, but if anyone has any question, although this is a recorded webinar, please send us the questions, and Mark is with us, who is a guest lecturer as well now. So whoever has any questions, please shoot it to us, because we would love to see what exactly that your problems are, what are you struggling with, and try to find a solution together for those issues. So we have a couple of questions set for us, but as I said, if we have enough questions, maybe we can have a follow-up webinar later, but definitely we have a course as well regarding the chargebacks and the disputes, because this is such an interesting area of payments and banking, so undiscussed and so important that I felt like that we need to put everything in the spotlight. So please, Mark, introduce yourself. How did you end up in payments? How did you found this amazing company, and why chargebacks, why disputes? Just tell us a bit more about your journey.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for having me. First off, super excited for this. Just to give a quick background on how I kind of got into the weird world of chargebacks. I was an e-commerce merchant for years and years, and always struggled with chargebacks. It seemed like we were just on the radar for some guys, and we would just consistently get attacked by fraudsters and people trying to get free stuff, and it just caused a ton of losses, ton of heartaches and headaches, and we ended up kind of trying some solutions and not really liking them, not really what we needed. So I ended up kind of building my own, and I guess the rest is history, although that would be quite an oversimplification.
Nice. Yeah, it feels like that everybody is just like stumbling upon that, ending up in payments. It's just like an accident, right? Because I've never met anyone who wanted to be a payment expert from kindergarten or from university, that I grew up, I will be a payment expert. But this is somehow coming out of a frustration of a lot of people. So I'm completely agreeing with you, because I was a suffering merchant too, trying to find the answers, and that's how I started my company. So definitely can relate. So what exactly that nowadays that you're doing, and how are you tackling these problems?
Yeah, absolutely. So we do pretty much everything in terms of chargebacks, particularly kind of trying to help merchants to mitigate the risk of chargebacks, right? So we do kind of like a full service approach for merchants to help just reduce the amount of chargebacks that are coming in, and be able to analyze their chargeback problem, what's causing chargebacks, and then be able to implement solutions, typically fully automated solutions, to just help not receive chargebacks, just get those off of their plate. And then if some chargebacks slip through, which at scale they inevitably do, then we help to win those back on behalf of the merchant, assuming that the chargeback case is invalid. So we've been doing this for about 4 years, and have helped over 5,000 merchants to kind of help reduce their chargeback problem and worry a little bit less about chargebacks.
Yes, and I feel like that you guys in the States might have a different approach to that, because you're still using a lot of 2Ds. So there is no 3D, the three dimension authentication, which we are very familiar in Europe. So maybe that could be the reason that you are more dealing with chargebacks. And of course, your customers are a bit more witty as well in the US, I feel, because in Europe, usually when you're walking on the street and you're asking anyone that hey, do you know that if you buy online something, there is a thing as chargeback? I would say not even 50% of the people, of the everyday people on the street would be able to say that, but you guys in the US are much more developed on that. So I feel like that in the US, this chargeback problem is a bigger one. Am I right on this? Do you see like US is definitely leading here, or what are your thoughts?
Absolutely. And that's a range of reasons, like you had indicated. One is obviously 3D Secure is just not very prevalent in the US. In fact, it kind of works against merchants in some cases from an approval rate perspective, so it's not very widespread. And then there's this whole movement with the US credit card companies to just advertise this kind of no fault to our customer deal, in which they're essentially saying, like, they run TV commercials like, you will never ever be held liable for anything you don't want to pay for. And then we also have this movement of customers that have understood that the chargeback system exists, but not only that, they've understood how easy it is to get their money back, and that leads to a small portion of customers kind of gaming the system, if you will, and then utilizing that to essentially get free products. So we have this whole range of factors here in the US that has sort of caused a huge spike in chargebacks recently, and is continuing to spike. And when you look at other countries, it's not really following the same as the US, unfortunately, for better or for worse, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, important for you, right? Because it keeps you entertained for a long time. But yeah, it's interesting how different locations can affect it differently. Let's jump into the questions, because these are some super interesting questions. Mark, can you define fraud from a compliance perspective and explain how does it differ from general wrongdoing in a business context?
Yeah, for sure. So fraud is just this really, really broad term that I think definitely needs to be kind of like explained in terms of what that actually means, because fraud can mean a lot of different things. So I think it's super important to just kind of understand what it means from like a base definition, and then also kind of what that looks like practically in 2024, right? So fraud from a base perspective, especially in the chargeback sense, is essentially saying that a consumer did not make this purchase, right? So their card was stolen, unauthorized use, et cetera, they didn't make this purchase, they shouldn't be liable, cardholder gets their money back. But unfortunately, that's not necessarily the case. So I like to think of fraud in certain buckets, some of which would be that circumstance. They would be the cardholder's details were leaked somewhere, they were stolen, and someone ended up purchasing using their card details. However, there is also what's called friendly fraud, which would be a cardholder that knowingly purchases an item, and then they may have good intentions to start off with, but something goes wrong, they forget, they don't recognize the statement descriptor, blah blah blah, and they end up charging back. So they may call it fraud, but technically it's not fraud. That's where we kind of group it into this friendly fraud bucket. So fraud is really not supposed to be when someone knowingly purchases using their own card details with good intentions, and then something happens down the line. But unfortunately, that's just kind of how it is. So it's important to just go behind the reason code of a chargeback and not just look at fraud from a really high level, but truly understand, is this friendly fraud? Is this criminal fraud? And who exactly is charging back here, if that makes sense.
Right. Tell us a bit more about the codes, because I think a lot of people still don't understand that there is a code for every different, fraud, and who gives the codes, and what kind of codes are there, and what happens if someone is mistaking one code to another. What are these codes?
So based on the card type, so whether it's a Visa card, MasterCard, Amex, Discover, etc., they each have their own set of reason codes for disputes, some of which make sense, some of which make no sense. Some of these codes, very ambiguous. You have no idea what's going on. Some of these codes make a little bit more sense though. And essentially when a customer charges back, whether they do it over the phone, whether they do it on their app or their mobile portal, then they're going to pick a reason that they're charging back, right? They may say, I didn't receive this. They may say, I didn't make this purchase. I canceled this subscription. I didn't like this product. It's unacceptable, blah, blah, blah. And then whenever that dispute gets filed, the business will get a code, and hopefully their processor will try to help them distinguish what that code means. Some of them will just give you the code, but some of them will try to kind of group it into some buckets. Like this is the fraud codes, right? This is the product not received codes, etc. Which frankly is the least we can do, because we can't expect merchants to remember all these codes. There's like 100. I don't even know all of them, and I do this all day, every day. So it's definitely really important, I would say, to just, make sure you understand that code, but also understand that that may not necessarily be the case. Like I was indicating with my last kind of question and answer, a lot of times it's miscategorized, right? A lot of times consumer didn't get their card stolen, but it's still coming in as like a fraud claim, an unauthorized transaction, that kind of stuff. So it's important to, understand the codes, but, don't just take them at face value. Really try to dig in a little bit deeper as well.
Got you. All right, interesting. Let's see the other question. It says that how the chargeback process evolved over the years, and I would be super curious about, because I remember when I started, being in the payment and banking industry, there was no open banking, there was no instant payments. It was a traditional card payments and the traditional bank wires, and everything was so much easier. I'm sure that a lot of things not only with the chargeback, but with the fraud process, how you're evaluating the fraud. So it would be really good to see that, first of all, why do we have chargeback? Why are we even talking about chargeback? Who came up with this idea and why? And how did it to what we are dealing with today?
Absolutely. So from a root level, chargebacks are there for consumer protection, which is amazing, right? That's why PayPal blew up and they're the biggest alternative payment method, is because consumer protection, right? If someone buys something online from a store they've never seen, a person they've never met, they need to feel protected, right? So that is the root cause of the chargeback system. Now, in the past, I think chargebacks were pretty rarely used, right? I think that it was really just an as-needed situation, but now it's a lot easier to file a dispute. You don't even need to call your bank. You can just go in your app. No one asks you any questions. You just click a couple buttons and you get your money back instantly, which it may be good for the consumer, but I think for businesses, especially when consumers catch on to the fact that that system can be abused, it isn't a good thing, right? It leads to a lot more losses for businesses, and it increases like 20% year over year. So if you think about how that has evolved over 20 years, that's a huge increase in chargebacks, 20% year over year. I mean, that's a lot of chargebacks, right? So this has contributed to hundreds of billions of dollars in losses for merchants. So there's been a ton of technology that has come and gone and is still around in order to just kind of help even the playing field a little bit for these merchants. Obviously, fraud has also evolved. There were the days in which you could just have AVS and CVV on, and then you wouldn't get much fraud. But frankly, I mean, with the rise in the just sophistication and technology, fraud has also evolved, if not quicker than just general technology has. And the businesses just need to stay really, really on top of things, or they're just going to get their lunch taken by a lot of fraudsters. Unfortunately, there's this huge market now, which is just kind of underground fraudsters that are abusing the chargeback system, taking millions of card numbers off of the dark web and running them through thousands of online stores, trying to get free products. And it's just, it's a really, really kind of sophisticated thing that has occurred. And frankly, like, technology has come to meet that demand as, you know, the rise in fraud and the rise of chargebacks has become very, very clear. However, you know, it's always a constant battle with these fraudsters. So I think chargebacks have evolved quite a bit. They become a lot more prevalent. I think a lot more smaller businesses are worrying about them, whereas that may not have been the case a while back. And frankly, it's just something that every business needs to think about now. Whereas before it was just, I think, more so, you know, you get one chargeback every year or every couple months or something like that. But now it's like you really, really have to think about it. Otherwise, again, you're gonna take some losses that are pretty significant.
Yes, and it's interesting how you say that, you know, technology is fraudsters. Of course, we think that technology is obviously benefiting us, right? We've got better fraud tools, and the AI is recording all of those discrepancies and alerts us. So we have better technology to fight those criminals. But we forget that, yes, of course, the criminals have much more sophisticated, because they're also using AI, and of course they could be always a couple of steps ahead of us. Yep. And it reminds me of there was a criminal gang who was just going around in public transport with the POS machine and touching to everyone who's got the wallet, you know, sticking out of their pocket, or, you know, the ladies' bags, because they thought that, you know, under a certain amount you don't have to have the PIN code or the signature or anything to authorize those transactions. And there was an overall panic, and was that people just didn't know that there is such a thing as a chargeback. So even though that this happens to you, you cannot be a victim for that, because if you're monitoring your bank account regularly and you are just recognizing something which doesn't belong there, then even if it's a small amount, you can dispute yours. As you said at the beginning, is that yes, there are not that much of an education around that. I mean, you guys are really nailing it in the States with these adverts and whatnot, but here in Europe somehow we still don't talk about it, and what we feel like that once that money is gone from the card, it's gone forever, and then we start panicking. And that's why it's interesting to see that yes, chargeback can really damage the merchants, but can be also a very good way to, you know, protect the customers. Let's see, what are the most common types of fraud businesses face today? We mentioned, you know, the friendly fraud. We mentioned the one which is, you know, stolen cards or lost cards being run in the system. Is there something else that you see which is unique, or maybe we can summarize these for us?
Yeah, for sure. So again, I love grouping fraud into buckets. I know that's a nerdy thing to say, but I think it's really important to just kind of understand it. So number one, I would say, is fraud rings, which can be typically, like you said, there was criminal gangs going around with the POS systems. That happens to some extent online as well. And that's the realm in which we play in which typically these overseas companies are facilitating thousands and thousands and thousands of transactions, typically across a ton of, like, hundreds, thousands of different merchants, in order to essentially profit off of the business's loss and or the cardholder's loss. So unfortunately, like I mentioned, you know, you can buy thousands, millions of card numbers on the dark web now, and that leads to this whole market with fraud rings that go take those card numbers and they try to see how much stuff they can buy with them, which is very sad, but it's a huge problem. And these are often very, very sophisticated attacks where the CVV matches, the ABS matches, they're using proxies, and they're masking the fact that they're in Pakistan or India or Brazil or Chile or a numerous amount of countries that we found to be very prevalent with these fraud rings. So that's definitely a huge type of fraud, probably the most costly for merchants, because if you're not on top of it, they will exploit it as much as they possibly can, which means that some merchants never experience this. And then some merchants, they get a couple orders that slip through, and then all of a sudden these fraudsters say, oh, well, they didn't catch those 5 orders. Well, let's place 500 or 5,000. And then that's where it really, really gets bad for these businesses. So we experience this all day, every day. We built a lot of technology around it, but I would definitely say the fraud rings are kind of top of mind because, again, it can cause the most losses by far. And then the next type I would probably say is reseller rings, which most people probably haven't heard of, but there is, again, a whole market just dedicated towards essentially taking products, buying them online, and then reselling them, flipping them, often on Amazon or eBay. We see this a lot more with our bigger clients, right? Like these bigger brands that are doing, 9 figures a year. They have like notoriety. People want their products. People are searching their products on Amazon, on eBay, etc. There's a large market just to be had in kind of like getting those products and then often exploiting like discounts and trying to find sneaky ways to get them for cheaper. Sometimes they'll charge back everything. Sometimes they won't though. Sometimes they'll actually be purchasing these products, but they're somehow exploiting some discounts that's not supposed to be exploited. Like a lot of stores do like a first time purchase, you get 25% off or something like that. They'll just take that discount, they'll create 1,000 customers that get that 25% off, and then they'll sell it for 15% off of your price on eBay or your price on Amazon. So they're essentially kind of undercutting you on these marketplaces. And I would definitely consider that fraud. Not everyone would, but I definitely would consider that fraud. And then the other 2 types I would say are kind of like real customers. So someone that actually likes your products, they want your products, they want to try your products, right? I would say there's 2 types of customers, right? There's one customer that has good intentions. They buy your product, they're not thinking of charging back. They're thinking like they want to try this product, they can't wait, and they buy from you. And then something may go wrong down the line. Again, maybe they don't recognize the charge, they forgot about it, maybe it doesn't arrive on time, maybe they just change their mind, cash flow's getting a little tight and they just kind of want to get their money back. This is friendly fraud, but it's maybe not intentional. This would essentially mean that they had good intentions to start off with, but they ended up charging back for one reason or another. And then there's also the customers who, again, maybe real card holders, they may, have that card in their hands, but they know that they're probably going to be charging that back. They may say, oh, this is $300, but, I could probably get my money back if I just dispute it. So they order something kind of with the intention of filing a chargeback, which is very prevalent in the US, unfortunately, due to the fact that there's essentially no recourse. So consumers feel very protected in doing this. And that's kind of the 4 buckets. So reseller rings, there's fraud rings, there's friendly fraud with intention, and then there's friendly fraud without intention.
Got you. And what do you think? Who is suffering more of these fraud? Is it the merchant, or is it actually the client who is purchasing those items? Who is losing more in general on all of these frauds?
Typically, it's the merchant, unfortunately. I mean, oftentimes the bank will take the loss, but that's with very low ticket chargebacks, right? Like, 10, 20 euro. But often it is going to be the merchant, because everything gets passed on to the merchant pays a chargeback fee, the merchant loses the money from the product, they lose the money itself, they have to refund it obviously through the chargeback process. And I mean, some of these chargeback fees are $25, $35, plus they're losing the product cost, which is typically 30 to 50% of the order value. So all in all, the business is losing 2 to 3 times what the actual chargeback is, which is ridiculous. And ultimately, they're the ones that pay the price. And at the end of the day, there's always that saying that the consumer pays for it in the end. which may be fair with these bigger businesses. But again, I think it's these smaller businesses that get targeted the most. And ultimately, they're the ones that take the most losses, unfortunately.
Right, and the client doesn't even have a responsibility who even did a friendly fraud and get caught on doing the friendly fraud. I mean, if he's doing obviously a friendly fraud, there is no penalty for that, right? It's not something that stops you from doing it again and again and again and again, right? So you tried it once, you realize that how easy is that, and from that, which is over $500, you're going to just charge back, try your luck, and then maybe 30% of your purchases are free, right?
Yep. Absolutely. I've almost never heard of any recourse, but it is technically illegal in the US. It's fraud. And I have heard someone who ripped off Amazon for millions of dollars, they went to jail. But if you rip off the small businesses and don't have huge legal teams, then you're good, essentially. There's virtually no recourse.
Wow, this is so sad, because it's hard enough to start your own business, right? But there's on top and have no responsibility for the fraud. It just makes everything even worse. Wow, it's crazy. And that leads to the next question, which is, why does fraud remain prevalent despite advancements in detection methods? Because now we've got AI and we've got all of these advanced tools, and of course everybody should know what's happening, and now we've got great tools. Why are we still talking about fraud? Is it not something that we can filter out? I mean, other than friendly fraud, obviously, but can we just not put, for example, millions of data instead of what you guys are using to the in the States, but maybe something that, I don't know, just type in a secret code or something that really makes sure that the client is the client who wants to pay for it, and therefore you're winning the dispute in case it happens later.
Right, for sure. Well, number one, I would say, is the fact that the best technology is really not widespread. The best technology is really used by the larger businesses. So the best technology is all AI based, and it's all quite expensive. That was one of the biggest reasons and issues that I saw as a merchant, was there's lower level fraud tools where you may pay a couple cents per transaction. There's the ones that actually work, which are typically more enterprise focused, so they're thousands and thousands of dollars a month. The small businesses just can't pay that. It doesn't make any sense for them. So they are the ones ultimately that end up taking the most losses percentage wise, because they're just on basic fraud tools. They may have AVS and CVV, maybe some device identification or some database scrubbing, but it's not the same. You have to be using a fraud tool if you really want to reduce your losses that has AI and a ton of data. And there are only a handful of companies that do that. So it's unfortunate, but ultimately the small ones are the ones that pay the price of not using a good fraud tool. So the fraud is very minimal on the enterprise level, because they typically have very expensive software, and then depending on the size of the business, they have teams in order to optimize that software. So that's why the smaller businesses are, again, taking most of the losses. But we've also seen the fact that you can't really flag a real customer, right? If a real customer has the intention of purchasing from you and then later charges back, you're not stopping that, right? Like, you're letting that customer purchase from you. How are you supposed to know that they're going to charge back eventually? So fraud is always going to exist despite the technology. And as customers get more and more familiar with the chargeback process and the fact that they can get their money back, I only see it increasing, unfortunately. Plus the fact that, like we were talking about, fraudsters have access to the same technology, and they're on the cutting edge, and they're often overseas. And if they can even get a little bit of orders through, a little bit of those transactions succeed, then it's worth it. They may be in a country where average income is very little. And, if they're able to get 100 or 1,000 transactions a month to go through of the 100,000 that they attempt, then it's a very profitable endeavor for them. So there's a lot of money to be made in it. Unfortunately, it's very little risk for these fraudsters overseas. I mean, who's going to go after them? And unfortunately, there's very little investment too, with the rise in technology just being very publicly available. It's not so good for the fraudsters,
Yes. Wow. It's interesting. And I agree with you completely that when there is an opportunity, there is always a person who is taking that opportunity, right? So if there is any little loophole in the system, that's going to be exploited for sure. It's even more interesting in high risk because, high risk companies can be high risk just simply because they to have chargebacks or the opportunity for the chargebacks. And I have seen in my practice that there are a lot of payment providers who just don't even deal with chargebacks. They just charge you, automatically deduct, and they just don't even have the opportunity to dispute the transaction from the merchant side. It automatically and that is basically how they are offering their services to the merchant, that yes, if you got a chargeback, it automatically goes through because we just don't have the technology to filter it out and dispute and go by one, but that's what you have, dear merchant. You already have, 5% chargeback anyway, so that's the only option. So it could be a downward spiral for the merchant once they overstep that magical number when no longer they're considered as a low risk. Then it can be even harder and harder to find a payment provider, and that can be even worse and worse.
Absolutely.
So let's see the other question, which is asking us that what are the early signs that fraud might be occurring within a company or through its payment channels? I mean, I can say, yes, the activities, certain business activities are more prone to chargeback. For example, the subscription. Oh, I forgot to cancel my subscription. Let's charge back the last 3 months. Or, for example, value items, or for example digital goods, when I know that I've got 6 months to do the chargeback, so I can enjoy my online training and watching the movie and consume all of that digital content, and I can charge it back later saying like it or it was glitching, and good luck to prove that. But in your experience, Mark, what are the very, very common signs, warning signs that, all right, you're going to have a lot of problem with chargeback?
Yeah, for sure. So industry aside, the biggest signs for a merchant that they have a chargeback problem incoming would be a high velocity of orders. So if they normally get let's say 3 orders an hour, and all of a sudden they get 50, there's probably an issue there, right? Or if the orders are very high value, so normally you have an AOV of $100, and all of a sudden you get orders for $500 or $1,000, that's pretty suspicious. Often it could be just weird looking customers. Like you go in, you look at the customer, it seems like a fake email or a fake name. You look up the address. It's not a very nice place, despite the fact they ordered $2,000 worth of something. I don't know. It's just a little weird, a little off, I think ultimately, if it seems too good to be true, it often is. I've seen way too many merchants get really excited over, this really high value order. This is amazing, like our best customer ever. And then it just turns out to be fraud. And it's very, very sad because they end up losing the amount from the product as well. So, you could ultimately take very little losses on that, but a lot of these guys get too excited and they ship the order and they lose a lot of money. So if it seems too good to be true, it's probably too good to be true. From kind of a post-authorization point, meaning that after you've sort of filtered out like the suspicious, kind of weird looking transactions, There's also, there's multiple things that you could do to actually know before the chargeback hits. So there's what's called TC40 and safe data, which is essentially like a fraud alert. So what you may not know is the bank doesn't immediately file a chargeback. Like if a consumer files a chargeback with their bank, the merchant doesn't receive that instantaneously. It may take a couple days, sometimes even a couple weeks in some cases to file a chargeback, which is super weird. But in the meantime, a lot of times the bank will file a fraud alert. So a TC40 or a safe alert, which essentially says that this may be a fraudulent transaction. Not all of those turn into chargebacks, but a large portion of them do. So essentially this gives the merchant a little bit of a heads up. They know, perhaps they're able to stop the shipment or the delivery of the order. And then the next kind of step in that early notification is chargeback alerts. So alerts such as like Verify and Ethica products, they can help to give an early notification before that chargeback hits, which allows kind of remediation of the order. Maybe you can stop a shipment, maybe you can refund it if you want to prevent the chargeback, etc. So there's definitely ways to kind of know when a fraud attack is incoming, but they happen both on just like analyzing the order, looking for suspicious details, but also after that process, you can actually get an early heads up, an early notification, which is super cool.
Now, what are you going to do? I mean, what would you recommend, let's say, to your friend who is coming to you and says that, Mark, we just get the best order of our lives and this is good, and you know that, no, this is definitely fraud. But how would you convince your friend that, no, stop the order, no, this is too good to be true? How do you break his enthusiasm and talk sense? And because, you know, we're all we're all too excited sometimes, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I think number one is you have to have a tool that actually shows you the risk of an order. If you're just going on the ticket values really high, or you're getting a lot of orders, that's a tough one to prove, because maybe someone did just order a ton of stuff from you, right? That happens. It's possible. But if you're able to show them an analysis from a software that shows like a 99 out of 100 risk score and all the things wrong with this, and this order was placed from Algeria and shipped to Kenya, like there's issues there, right? Like that I think is a lot easier to prove versus just, hey, this order is a little bit suspicious, So I think it's really important to have the right tools and the right data available so that you can actually refund an order with confidence, because that's important too. You can't just be refunding all these customers that are placing a lot of orders from you. Those could be your most valuable customers. So it's important to really understand what's wrong with the order, and ideally just use a tool that finds all the stuff wrong with the order automatically.
Yeah, because I see a lot in my practice that, often these fraud tools are too sufficient. And, nowadays everybody is digital nomading. At the winter, you are in Bali, and then you're going to, I don't know, skiing somewhere in the mountains and of course, your card is registered to your home address, but you're still making foreign purchases. And that, what I can see, is really freaking out the fraud tool, and it gives the fake alert. So how would you set up what is the right amount of alert and what is that you really need to pay attention, not to lose the best customer who just happened to be in a different country and just make a funny order? What would you do? Would you hire someone who is manually calling the customers, checking on the Google map if the address is indeed valid, or what are the things that you personally say in a small merchant who has the capabilities to manually double check those orders?
Great question. So I hate to say it, but number one, are they trying to hide the fact they're in a different country? Because it's definitely possible to do so. You can use proxies, you can use VPNs, you can use all sorts of stuff to mask your location. And it's pretty easy to tell if someone's trying to mask their location, right? So if they're not, then it's a lot better. If they're traveling and they're using like a high-risk proxy to hide their location, we're flagging that order. I don't care. Like, it's not worth it.
Yeah.
Like, most of those are going to be fraud. Right. And maybe they're just very techy and they want to, like, not be on a public IP at the airport with I don't care. Like, we're flagging that order. Now, if they're not trying to hide their location, then it's a little bit different, right? And then we can look at, like, the order history from the customer. Do they have a history of placing transactions from outside of their city or their state or their, country? We can look at how many transactions do we have from this customer? Are they all non-fraud? Have any of them been charged back? How long has this customer been around? How long has this email been around? What is the history on everything we have access to? What's the history on the email, the address, the customer card number? Like, all these types of data points are very important to not have any false positives. And it's also important to work with, again, an AI solution that actually takes everything into account, because if you just use basic fraud tools, then it's going to flag that. So it's definitely important to kind of have a balance and a mixture, but a lot of that, I would say, also comes down to the proxies and the VPNs and the IP masking tools. That is very, 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 very common with fraudsters, because they know that if it's very obvious that they're not in that country, then their order will get flagged. And unfortunately, since they try to mask it, if the merchant's using a good fraud tool, then they're going to get flagged either way or not.
Yeah, exactly. Too true. Be true is too good to be true, and you need to use your gut sometimes, your gut feeling, to tell you what's right and what's wrong, right? Is sometimes you just can't learn that. Can you share the funniest or the most bizarre fraud case that you've ever encountered? And, what lessons did you learn?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm going to tell a somewhat sad story here, but it came to mind because I just heard about this processor yesterday, but a couple months back, I got an email from a guy who was getting a lot of fraud, right? It seemed like criminal fraud, like fraud rings, like a lot of fraud, right? I don't know how much, but it was a good bit. And instead of kind of advising in like solutions, like fraud tools, fraud scanning, AVS, CVV, AI tools, etc., their processor tells them, all right, well, all your frauds on Visa, MasterCard, Discover, and Amex, so just don't accept those cards and you won't get any more fraud. And he does that. He stops accepting all the major card brands. He was only accepting Diners Club and JCB. And I don't know anyone with Diners Club or JCB. So he emails me and he's like, what are we supposed to do? Like, we're not making any money now. And I'm like, you can't make any money. Like, what? That's impossible. Like, no one has those cards. Like, they couldn't purchase from you if they wanted to. You're essentially stopping your revenue from coming in just because you had fraud. It doesn't make any sense. So that was the most bizarre situation I had ever seen. And they were trying to make it the fault of the processor, which to some extent it is. Like, you can't always take your processor's word for granted. You should definitely make your own decisions, but you would hope that your processor would be advising you properly. Unfortunately, that was not the case. And that could have been prevented from talking to anyone with half of a brain. But I think the responsibility definitely falls on the merchant as well, just because I don't think the merchant also knows anyone with Diners Club or JCB. So that was the most bizarre situation I would say I've ever seen with fraud.
Oh my God, yeah, it's pretty crazy because, how are you going to sell without payment methods, right? It's like more people out there clicking, putting things in the basket, but they can't check out. Wow.
Yeah, not even
for me, the craziest. Yeah, exactly. It's mental. For me, the craziest was that I was actually doing a due diligence for a new client, and we are talking department. So you talk to sales, you talk to payments, and one of the sales guys said that, you know what, we are doing things differently here. I'm like, tell me more. Well, we don't let the client make a decision and then they can pull out at the last minute and we are sale. What we are doing when we are on the phone with the client, we ask for their card details and we put the card details in for them. Of course, they are authorizing in their own end the process, but in this way, the client cannot just hang up the phone and not pay, and therefore we are losing the sale. And we are just actually making killing in sales because we are just closing a lot. And I was like, no. You can't really do that, because then obviously all the card details are going through from one single point, which is your desk. And obviously, if you're processing cards, you have to keep the data security, like have the card numbers lingering around in your desk, half overhead by your colleague in the next desk. So sometimes people just really don't understand that how much of a risk they are taking with these creative methods of, yes, it might be easier to close a customer still on the phone instead of sending them the payment link, but there is a reason for the payment link, because it's secure, it's good, the client has an opportunity to change their mind. So yes, sometimes I feel like, education is just not there when people are making all of these decisions and not really thinking about this. And of course, when the head of payment heard that, they were like turning purple and green, and oh my god, I didn't know that you were doing that to the sales department. But yeah, this was one of the shocking stories that I've heard, that manually processing payments, yes you can, but good luck for your fraud. So let's see now a bit more on the compliance. That's one thing that what we are advising to the clients, and of course we are going to their premises and we are evaluating everything, and we tell them that listen to your gut. If it's too good to be true, that's one thing. But any practical steps, are there any practical steps that businesses can take to ensure that their compliance policies are robust enough to deter fraud? So for example, we are not taking clients from certain countries. I know that I might shoot myself in the leg and I'm not going to have, sales from, but it's just more prone to fraud. Or is there any way that the overall company policy says no, and what are the consequences of those?
Yeah. I think bare minimum, you need to set a value as a business in which it's suspicious, right? Whether that's 3 times your normal order value or 5 times or 10 times, you will eventually get an order for a ton of money. And then you need to figure out if that's a real order, right? You need to have some sort of manual review process to call the customer, email, text, whatever, get in touch with the customer. Also, I've definitely seen fraudsters respond to those and be like, oh yeah, I'm legit, like don't worry, ship my order. So keep that in mind. But definitely set just a cap in which you either don't ship any products, you don't fulfill any products, or you at least go through a verification process with the customer. That definitely recommend, just to minimize your losses. And then number 2 would be velocity filters. So most of the gateways have velocity checks, but basically that means if the same card is used to purchase in a suspicious amount of times, then you flag and or cancel those orders. So normally customers purchase from you once, maybe twice in a day, right? If they're buying 10 or 20 or 30 different times from you, that's a huge red flag. So definitely need to be aware of that. And then outside of that, I ultimately think that most businesses need an AI fraud tool. I know I've said this before, but fraud is just very sophisticated nowadays. And if you're trying to catch it manually, they're always going to be one step ahead of you. So you need to use an AI fraud company if you're at least like 5 figures a month in revenue. So there's a ton out there, like Sift, Signified, No Fraud, Riskify, Count. There's a lot. I also run one, but we're more so on the e-commerce side of things. So I would definitely recommend using an AI fraud tool. Otherwise, ultimately, sophisticated fraudsters will just find a way around it. I mean, they always will to some extent, but with the AI tools, at least it catches it, right? And then it fixes it in real time, and then that method no longer works. So they have to find another method, right? But if you just have like basic kind of checks and balances, then they will be exploited. So I definitely recommend just having a bit more of an AI tool in place there. Otherwise, you're really leaving yourself vulnerable.
Yeah. We see a lot, mainly with the emerging technologies, that chargeback is just being eliminated from the payment process. So, for example, in Europe, we have a lot of open banking. I think it's creeping up in the States as well. Instant payments, instant banking, peer-to-peer payments, like you guys have which is perfect for fraudsters, because once the money is sent, of course, there is still the dispute procedure, but it's so burdensome, and then you have to actually sometimes go to the bank and sign the form and go to the police and open an investigation. It's not that just easy as a chargeback. What I feel like is that these innovative methodologies, yes, merchants are winning because woohoo, finally we don't have any chargebacks, so life is good. But in a way that the consumers can lose their rights for the fair and square business. What do you think? Are we really hard payments, and merchants are more and more motivated to promote these alternative payment methods without a chargeback simply because it's cheaper, it benefits them better, and in a way then chargeback is going to disappear simply because customers don't even know how important is that? What are your thoughts on this?
I think in order to get mass adoption, particularly here in the US where chargebacks are so known, there definitely needs to be consumer protection with these instant payment methods. We've seen this with Zelle. Our government, our Congress has been pushing Zelle specifically to have some sort of consumer protection because scams are so rampant. I think that this is only going to occur more and more. The one thing that they can't really control in terms of a dispute process would be crypto, just because there is essentially no company regulation behind that. But I think for everything else fiat, that there's probably going to have to be some sort of an easier dispute process to compete with credit cards. And businesses want to get rid of credit cards for more reasons than just chargebacks. The interchange, especially here in the US, is ridiculous. These companies are paying so much money to process credit cards. And if they were able to pay sub 1% and still get chargebacks, they'd be more than happy with that. But if they were able to pay sub 1% and get very little chargebacks because there's actually a fair system to dispute transactions, that I think would be even better. For example, if a customer files more than 3 to 5 chargebacks in a year, they should be blocked from filing any more chargebacks, period, point blank. I don't care. That should never happen, right? Unless their card gets stolen and it's a bunch of transactions close to each other. But if they're filing a chargeback in March and May and June and July and August and September, that's a bad cardholder. That cardholder should not be allowed to charge back. That cardholder should probably have some legal ramifications. There needs to be checks and balances for consumers that abuse the system, and right now there isn't. So I think if we can find a more fair dispute system where the merchant wins and the customer wins, that's the ideal. Because ultimately what we want to do is we want to get the bad apples out, both on the merchant side of things and on the customer side of things. And to do that, we need a more streamlined and we need a more fair process. So I'm hoping that the instant payment methods can offer a new way of doing things where you're not bound by Visa's guidelines and MasterCard's guidelines, and you get to really rethink and reimagine what the ideal dispute process looks like, both for consumers and for merchants.
Yes, and it's a hard one, right? Because you want you want to make sure that everybody is, having the money quickly and easily.
Yep.
How are you going to force the merchant to get the money back at the same time when it's already being spent, right? Good luck to go after the merchant. And then if there is no rolling reserve, if there is no, these kind of protections, that how are you going to make sure that the merchant is not every 3 months after scamming people? Because, fraudsters are not only on the customer side, it could be on the business side as well. And that's what we see a lot, for example, in high risk That's true. Mark, is there anything that we didn't discuss but you feel like that we should? Because I think we already discussed who are more vulnerable to fraud and chargeback. Is there something that we haven't discussed but you feel like that we need to talk about?
I think it was great that we talked about sort of the future of chargebacks with the new payment methods that are kind of coming into the frame. I think it's going to be really, really interesting to kind of see the battle, both regulatory and also just consumer awareness of these new payment methods. Europe is definitely leading the way, I think, in terms of chargebacks and fraud. And hopefully the US follows to some regard. Unfortunately, 3DS and things like that don't seem like they're going to take off in the US. However, I hope that we will see different, like instant payment methods and other alternate payment methods kind of take off here. I'm really, really interested to see. We obviously have the rise in Klarna and buy now, pay later, and there's all sorts of new technology with open banking and peer-to-peer payments and really, really cool stuff in the future. Now, whether or not that gets adoption is, I think, what we'll just kind of have to wait and see, especially here in the US where we can be a bit slow to do certain things. But I think it's going to be a really, really cool next decade or two, as there is a ton of innovation going on right now in fintech, and it'll be really, really interesting to see how that relates to disputes and fraud management and how businesses can become more protected while ensuring consumers are protected.
Yes, and I agree with you, because there are so million things to discover, one for each payment methods, and one payment method is just popping up like mushrooms after a rain. There are so many different payment methods all over the world. So yes, that means that I think we're going to be busy for the next 10 years for sure.
Absolutely.
And it's very exciting to see that how the world is evolving with the AI, not only for businesses but only for for criminals as well. So the two sides of AI is just bouncing heads, and let's see who's coming out as the winner out of that.
Absolutely.
But I'm really looking forward to the course as well, what we could do for this to go a bit deeper in the subject, just to really see the different tools, the real life examples, how the systems can filter out the different fraud in real life, how to differentiate between a good sale and the champagne opening moment and and the actual fraud, because I feel like that there are so many other aspects to it and so many other layers to discuss. So I think there could be definitely a bit to discuss deeper in a course. And yeah, I'm looking forward to have any kind of questions. So whoever has any questions to us, please shoot. Mark and me, we are just an email away, so we are very happy to reply to any of those questions. Please check out more on the courses on the Soltesz Institute site. We've got a lot of free webinars, a lot of free content that you can take advantage of. And of course, let's wait for the chargeback and dispute course with Mark. So thank you so much. Thank you very much for the attention and being with us today.
Thank you very much.